So I think, prior to our sessions, I always take a little walk, or just sit quietly and listening if it's snowing too hard or too cold, and just really listen, to anything that might be moving in soul, any images or whispers sort of from the ally, from the beloved. And I was noticing this morning here in the mountains anyway. I'm currently in Colorado in the US, and I was just noticing that there's more light. There's just more light here than there was last week or last month, or certainly over the solstice. And the days are getting a bit longer. The light is arriving earlier in the morning and lasting later into the evening. And how there's this reddish, sort of purplish violet sort of glow that's in the mountains at sunrise during this time of the year. I think I just wrote about this, but it only seems to last for a few moments, that particular dance of color and light. Like if I turn from it, if I walk back inside, or I take too long in heating up the tea, I'll turn back and it will be gone. And I think that's just such a rich and bittersweet, sort of tender reminder of how fragile it is here in this world. How shaky, how tenuous this sort of opening that we've been given into life. It's here, and then we go and make the tea, and then it's gone. We turn to the world, to someone we love, to nature, and one day it will be gone. And I think just remembering this has a way, potentially, we have to always experiment for ourselves, but of making things more vivid, more translucent, more precious, and that would include this opportunity that I have to be with you all, to gather like this as friends and fellow travelers, and to remember together what it is that's most important to us. Like, what am I really doing here? Especially in this frenetic, restless world that we're living in right now, where in so many ways we've lost touch with the dream, with inner vision, with slowing down and listening to the soul and to the wisdom of inner and outer nature, which is always speaking to us. And so I think this slow return of the light that we see, at least in the northern hemisphere, this time of year, in the sky, in the mountains, in the trees, in the water, in the animal friends, the deer, the one rare black fox that hangs out around here. It's just a rich metaphor for this journey that we're making together, that of wholeness, of the felt sense of just being alive here, and this opportunity that's been granted to us. And I think very much related to this is that vital alchemical process that, recalling Jung's quote, where he says, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And after that particular statement, which you can look up in Jung's collected works, it's in volume 13 in his alchemical studies, if you roll like that. But there's a section in the, I don't know, half or two-thirds of the way through that text where he's speaking about the symbolism of the tree. where he makes that quote. And then just after the quote, you don't see this on social media nearly as much, but he goes on to say that this process is often disagreeable and therefore not all that popular. And I think that there's some real truth to that, and some very understandable reasons why that's so, which we can go into together. But here we are for now, the misfits, the perhaps part of that lineage coming down from Chiron, who was the original wounded healer, and that wisdom stream coming down from those Asclepian dream incubation temples, where our sensitivities, where our tenderness, where our historic core vulnerabilities, which are those wounds around love, that longing to be fully alive that's been seeded inside of each of us, that sometimes can get covered over, of course, but only temporarily. Where those achy and sore places, we start to see that these are not errors. They're not mistakes along the way. It's not some evidence of, I've done something wrong. I'm not okay. I've done the path wrong. I've been forsaken. Things that need to be fixed, to be cured, or even healed, because they're not unwhole. Grief is not unwhole. A broken heart is not unwhole. They aren't obstacles to our path, but they are the living path itself. And this sort of cry out from the great mystics and the great alchemists that the medicine, that healing tincture, is going to be found in the very center of the wound. That somehow the wound is serving an initiatory function. It's the way that so many of us, especially that would assemble in a group like this, it's how so many of us are initiated, just to use that language, into life, into the soul, into spirit, into God, into the beloved, into the arms of the beloved, whatever language is most resonant for us, into the Tao, which of course isn't an easy path. Perhaps it's not a path that any of us would choose consciously. I mean, surely there has to be another way. But it is a path that does bear certain sweet fruit, an aliveness and a connection and wholeness. It's like a full spectrum wholeness, the possibility of a life of profound meaning and a causeless joy, the joy of being itself that isn't the result of all of the outer circumstances all coming together in exactly the way we hoped or thought. It's a joy that it's just too wild for all of that. It's a joy that's wild and undomesticated and untamed, and it's not really a part of egoic process at all. It's always already here, and it's not organized around our own hopes and fears. It's just too wild for that. And that muse of joy, the joy maker, the joy weaver, is always here, awaiting relationship with us, whispering to us at times, and at other times surging in a more volcano-like way as activation in one of our relationships, as a strange mood that seems to come out of nowhere. We wake up in the morning and there it is, that blueness of sort of melancholy. It's there to greet us. Right? Unexplainable symptoms in our bodies, this constriction in my throat, this emptiness in my heart. this nausea in my belly, butterflies, as the figures who appear in our dreams. I mean, we may just start to see that the path really is everywhere. And perhaps even in those places where we least expected it, or were taught to expect it by a world that has forgotten about the great mysteries. You know, there's a an alchemical text that comes out of the Taoist tradition, and it's called The Secret of the Golden Flower. And, you know, in the text, the sages describe a path of healing, of self-illumination, of realizing the Tao, that totality, that wholeness as a living experience, not as a belief, not as an idea, but as a felt, living, embodied experience. You know, as involving a process that they describe as turning the light around, which I find to be such a rich image, you know, for the process of soul tending or soul making, turning the light of consciousness around, which is the light of love, really. Love being the expression of those wild and untamed, undomesticated qualities of openness and warmth, and how that lives and moves and breathes and unfolds itself within the alchemical vessel of these bodies, of these sensitive nervous systems that we have, and the ways that this light can cleanse our perception and polish our hearts, opening us into the creative, pregnant unknown, which is the fertile ground of all transformation and healing, which we can attune to, we can listen to, we can receive, and we can deepen in that. We can practice that because for many of us, it does take quite a bit of practice, of attention, of intention, slowing down every day, micro moments of attunement. And it's not easy to turn toward that and to open to that, and does require a certain sort of surrendering, which is a tricky word for some of us. You know, we have to go slow and be really honest with ourselves about what it is that we really need in a particular moment and where we are on our journey. We can't skip stages. The alchemists learned this lesson the hard way, which is the reality for us at times as well. We can talk more about that.